one of you to this webinar. Center for International Studies is part of Faculty of Humanities and Social Studies at Somaiya Vidyavihar University. It has essentially two programs, one MA in China Studies, the second one MA in International Studies. The center also intends to start a PhD program in International Studies as well as in China Studies. The purpose of today's webinar is to provide the required information and awareness about the kind of subjects that students who are admitted to the MA program in International Studies would be exposed to. As we all are aware, quite a few interesting subjects which are dynamically evolving by the week or by the day that include theories of international relations, India's foreign policy, as well as foreign policy of a few prominent countries around the globe, international law, understanding others' cultures, that is a cross-cultural understanding and management, democracy and political institutions, governance of global institutions, specialized course on United Nations, understanding regions. Some regions we spend intense focus on understanding this, and understanding about the human rights, both theory as well as practice in different parts of the world. Now, the options that are available to students who have completed the graduation are plenty. But in today's world, the diplomacy, understanding the subject like international relations is immense. It is growing leaps and bounds. Plenty of opportunities besides enhancing the theoretical understanding. The students would have a lot of job opportunities also. This is an interesting area, and while learning, students would not face any boredom. It is nothing like understanding, the set subjects such as mathematics, or not to demean them, but there is a kind of connection with what is happening in the reality with the theory, and the students would enjoy while studying this master's program. So, as the title suggests, Indispensable India, let us try to understand from an experienced career diplomat, Ambassador T.P. Sreenivasan, who has more than 3.5 decades of formal experience, and is also into this field even post his retirement. He is very active, writing lots of books, and I have personally known him for nearly 2 years now. He is a good speaker, and he provides, for the sake of those who don't have domain expertise, some of the developments in the arena of diplomacy, foreign policy, in the form of YouTube content that everyone can understand and enjoy. Geopolitics that are changing on a regular basis, some of the FDI and other economy-related matters, probably strategic partnerships, and changing role of India now gaining some kind of a greater confidence of the most powerful nations around the globe, has made probably India to play a vital role in improving and enriching the global institutional framework. Now, with these few aspects, I'll now request Professor Satyendra Upadhyay to take over and carry on the further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. It's my great privilege and honor to introduce Ambassador T.P. Sreenivasan, today's speaker on Indispensable India. He is a former ambassador and permanent representative of India to the United Nations, Vienna, and governor for India of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Vienna, and ambassador to Austria and Slovenia. Ambassador T.P. Sreenivasan has served in the Indian Foreign Services for 37 years. Sir has nearly 20 years of experience in multilateral diplomacy and has represented India at a number of international conferences organized by United Nations, the Commonwealth, and non-aligned movement. He has chaired several United Nations committee and conferences. Sir is also mentor for our international studies program at Somaiya Vidyavihar University. So not taking much of time, I would request Ambassador Tipu sir to deliver his talk. Sir, platform is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Shivkumar and Professor Satyendra, for introducing me. And first of all, let me also thank the Vice Chancellor of the university for offering me this position as a mentor and Professor of Eminence at the university. I think this is in recognition of the fact that you not only need excellent professors like Professor Shivkumar and Professor Satyendra, but also some practitioners to give a full dimension to international studies. I think that's a recognition which is growing in the world. And many of us who retired from the service find enough opportunities to engage in academic discussions. And so the idea of my speaking today is to give you a flavor of what I'll be able to contribute to the studies of international relations. Because many of the students who come would be graduates in international relations. They would understand the various technical and theoretical aspects. But nothing like handling foreign policy in the field, whether it is multilateral or bilateral. So the dimension that we add to the studies of international relations will be the experience that we have not only in formulating theories, but also in practicing them in actual field. And that is very important because that is something that the scholars do not have. Of course, they have the experience of going and attending meetings, etc. But to be a diplomat in the field for several years gives you a different approach and a different dimension of the studies. So that is where I justify my presence here. And I'm glad the university has asked me to do this. Well, coming to the topic, Indispensable India, I must say that we announced this topic long before The Economist came with a cover story, Indispensable India. I was quite astonished that we thought alike. But the point of my talking about that subject is because of the general impression that India is some kind of a newcomer into international relations. And this is absolutely false. We also fall into this trap of saying emerging India, regional India, coming up as a big nation, will soon be an important nation, etc. We also tend to repeat this because this is what we hear from the international community. But this is not true. India has been indispensable, I'm saying this very strongly, to international relations, the balancing of it, the performance of it, the perfection of the laws, all these, India has played a tremendous role right from 1947. In fact, I would say even before 1947, when the Congress party devised its own ideas about India's foreign policy. So every stage, our fortunes may have fluctuated. India's importance may have increased and reduced depending on the circumstances. But the relevance of India and the indispensability of India's role is absolutely there is no doubt about that. And that is what I would like to say in a very, as fast as possible, the different phases of Indian foreign policy since 1947. One Pandit Nehru said in the midnight of 14th August 1947 still holds good as far as India's foreign policy is concerned. Because he said, we have to work and work hard to give reality to our dreams. These dreams are for India, but they are also for the world. India's global fortunes may have fluctuated in the 75 years since he said that. But what he said at that time, in terms of commitment of India to the world, is absolutely current even today. In fact, the last speech that Prime Minister Narendra Modi made in the General Assembly, he virtually repeated what Pandit Nehru said in 1947. He said, I shall speak for India here. But when I speak for India, I'm not only speaking for India alone, but for the whole world. And the whole concept of Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, which he keeps repeating. Because the world, India has seen the world as a family. and we have joined the international community not to seek anything from there, but to give our experience, to engage in the conversations, and to shape policies as relevant at that particular time. So foreign policy cannot be static. So in these years, 75 years, our foreign policy has undergone many changes. But at every time, it was recognized by the world that India always made a constructive contribution. If you ask me which was the best time in India's diplomatic history, I would say it was the first few years, 1947 to 1962. Today, we are talking about a new world order which is being shaped by India and the United States. I'll come to that at the end. But in shaping the world in whatever way we could, India always played a role. India was a model for the number of colonial countries when India became independent. There were 52 members in the United Nations in 1945, and now there are 193. Where were all these nations? Most of them were colonies. So decolonization was the first area in which United Nations succeeded. And that success owes much to the non-aligned movement and Pandit Nehru. And the model was that India had secured freedom without firing a shot. And therefore, when we talked about decolonization, we talked about disarmament, we talked about the equitable distribution of wealth. We were talking from our own experience even at that particular time. And therefore, India's voice was very much heard there. And in that period of formation of the United Nations and its policies, you will see the role played by India. The non-aligned movement was not very highly respected by the West. In fact, they thought it was immoral. Soviet Union and its group tolerated non-alignment because there are certain principles of non-alignment like anti-imperialism, anti-colonialism, anti-apartheid, pro-Palestine. These are also policies of the Soviet Union and its group. So there was some kind of a natural alliance with the Soviet Union and others, as they claimed. But the role that we played in the United Nations was entirely in the interest of the peace of the world and not particularly of India's own interests. Because India's own interests are dominant in any policy that we pursue. But always we thought of the rest of the world in the process and sought more to give than to take from the United Nations. Why I said from 1947 to 62? Because in 62, we faced a very severe crisis. It was not just military aggression by China, but it was a disillusionment that caused to India because India had hoped and worked for India and China to work together and the Asia-African solidarity to replace the kind of bloc system that you have in the world. And that was the one. So the Chinese aggression in 1962 not only was a challenge to that our integrity and our sovereignty, but it was a challenge to the vision that Pandit Nehru had of a new generation of countries which would be able to hold the peace regardless of the bloc distinctions at that time. But the fact that we were not able to anticipate it and were not able to prevent it became a great shock to India. And we did not recover it till for a few years, after which we followed a more pragmatic policy. So we decided that we realized that the original ambition of India or the dream of India had to be readjusted in the new situation that had developed. So you have the second period, and we call it a pragmatic period, after what may be called the golden period. We came to a pragmatic period where we developed special relations with the Soviet Union, not for political reasons, but for very many other reasons. Because Soviet Union was the only country at that time which was looking to India for their own interests, because the development of Soviet Union was at a particular time that was very good in terms of heavy industry and the technology, etc. But they were very poor in consumer goods. So the consumer goods that we were able to produce at that time, like your Panama cigarettes or Ludhiana sweaters, were purchased by the Soviet Union in exchange for heavy industry and machinery and technology. So it was a very, very mutually satisfactory and mutually beneficial relationship that developed, which of course made the United States and others somewhat dissatisfied with us. And so we were considered some kind of a satellite of the Soviet Union. But that was the period in which we gained very much in terms of our industrial development, and with the same ambition that India should be a scientifically advanced nation, we got the support from the Soviet Union without spending our foreign exchange, because we had this rupee-ruble arrangement. Through a kind of arrangement, we were able to get the value of our goods from the Soviet Union. So it was not a politically oriented thing. But at the same time, it gave us, the non-aligned countries, which grew up to about 140, they were able to work in the political system of that time in order to gain advantages from both sides without excluding anyone. And that situation, of course, changed in 1990 when the Soviet Union collapsed. It was a very serious blow to us that Soviet Union just disappeared from the face of the earth. But the way we were able to quickly adjust ourselves to a globalized economy in 1992 and afterwards, and the way we readjusted our foreign policy in order to seek greater cooperation from the West, was absolutely a magical effect of Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and at that time the Finance Minister Manmohan Singh. So we were able to adjust very quickly to the new situation, because the bipolar world had disappeared and the unipolar world was born, and the multipolar world was not to be seen anywhere because the United States became the only superpower in the world. So we came to what is called a globalized foreign policy, from a pragmatic foreign policy to a globalized foreign policy from that time onwards, say from 1990 to 2014. So this is a long period of readjustment, and if we go into every kind of crisis that arose in the world at that time, India's advice was sought. Non-aligned meetings were very significant. And the role that the non-aligned was able to build at the time of the Cold War was extremely important. India was indispensable in every case. Look at, for example, at the height of the apartheid problem, that is the South African racial discrimination. India was the first country to raise this issue in the United Nations. Everybody said this is violation of the United Nations Charter because you are not supposed to interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. But what we raised at that time finally resulted in the abolition of the apartheid and independence of South Africa in 93-94, because we established that when it comes to violation of human rights on a grand scale, no country can claim that this is an internal matter. This has been proved later. Humanitarian intervention has become acceptable in certain situations. We know about Kuwait, we know about Iraq, etc. But the beginning was made that an absolute autocracy or an absolute country cannot destroy its own people just because they have sovereignty. And that concept was introduced by India, and that is what resulted. And then look at Palestine. The Security Council was completely paralyzed because of the vetoes of the two sides. But if you look at the very seminal resolutions were adopted in that particular time in order to maintain peace in the region, were all drafted, prepared by India. And India's advice was sought. So we used to be called some kind of a dalal, as though India has no interest. We are always working between the two of them. That's what we did. But we did that in the interest of India itself, because abolition of apartheid, a land for Palestine, these are things which are vital for our own good, just as it is good for the world. And then look at disarmament. Who started off the major disarmament treaties? Test ban treaty, for example. Even the NPT itself was an Indian draft, though it turned out to be such that we could not sign it. But the idea was the NPT would abolish nuclear weapons. It is not that we will assign some nuclear weapons to some countries and ask all others to sign the treaty and not manufacture weapons. That is how it finally evolved in the discussions. And that is why till today, India has been unable to sign the NPT. And that created a huge crisis. But even during that period, our focus was on nuclear disarmament. And we continued with it, even though we did not sign either the NPT or the CTBT. So the balance that was kept between disarmament and non-proliferation was again a contribution of India. So India was considered partial in the sense that we were against the NPT. But at the same time, we followed the NPT's basic principles because we are the ones who drafted it, that the ultimate objective will be total disarmament. And that got removed from the treaty. A certain commitment was given that we will do it, etc. But nothing has happened. They have only increased their armaments. And so each of these issues, whether it is Palestine, whether it is apartheid, whether it is disarmament, or even more on the economic and social side, India has been indispensable. India has been a member of the ECOSOC all these years. We have been a permanent member of the ECOSOC, elected, not nominated, because it was a crucial position that we were able to develop the ideas of equitable social and economic development. So all these have gone on, and after the end of the Cold War, we were able to modulate or moderate our policies or change our policies to such extent that we again became a kind of power which would like to bring the other powers together. So the regional groups developed. We contributed a lot to several groups. And that enabled us to deal with some of the huge crises that developed. So then came all these, the 21st century crises. The four of them we all know: 9/11, the economic meltdown, the pandemic, then the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So where do we stand on all this? How did we behave at that time? Because 9/11 did focus on terrorism and the importance of abolishing terrorism from the world. We have not been able to do that. But the focus was not on what had happened to the United States alone. The United States, of course, went to war against terror in Afghanistan. But the role of India at that time itself was to have a comprehensive convention on terrorism so that terrorism itself can be banned. But even today, terrorism has not been defined in the United Nations. And that excuse, we have not been able to have a comprehensive resolution on terrorism that we introduced many years ago. I personally introduced it in the journalism. And it became a very important factor soon after the 9/11. But it again has gone to the background, and terrorism still continues. But India is the biggest spokesman of anti-terrorism in the world today. And anyone who wants to deal with terrorism comes to us because we have the experience of 20 years. The Western world used to think that terrorism is manufactured only between India and Pakistan. They thought it was just an excuse that India was giving to Malay and Pakistan. But when 9/11 happened, they realized where terrorism lay. And that made a big difference to it. But still, today we have not dealt with it. The economic collapse of 2007, 2008 was rescued by Dr. Manmohan Singh personally. In fact, that is why Barack Obama called him my guru, because he was able to give a particular touch to that problem. And therefore, we have the G20 was born out of that because G7 realized that they will not be able to handle such issues in the future. And so there again, India played a big role. And now the pandemic, I think international cooperation, which was paralyzed in the United Nations because of China, India rescued it. India recovered it. We were the first to call a meeting of a regional group, SARC. Of course, it did not work because Pakistan did not play ball. And we called for the meeting of the G20 because the Security Council could not even meet to consider the pandemic. The greatest threat to humanity, existential threat to humanity. They could not deal with it. So who had to deal with it? It was India who showed the promise. India, which shared our technology with so many countries of the world and even donated vaccines, which we ourselves needed very badly. And there again, we provided leadership. And today, indispensability of India in dealing with the pandemic has been recognized in a case where the Security Council could not. And now last is the Russia-Ukraine war. Initially, people were very provoked by India's position that we were not condemning Russia. There was a lot of confusion and there was a feeling of frustration in the world, particularly in the Western world, that India should be doing this. But today, we have this understanding with the United States because the United States has realized that it was India's position that helped in the process. I'm not saying that we have accomplished it, but in Bali, the kind of agreement that was reached among the foreign ministers, among these G20 summit, was actually shaped by India. And that we were able to do because of our position. If we had condemned Russia, or if we had sided with anybody else, India would not have been able to play that role. And that is the recognition of it that we now see. Otherwise, even 2 months ago, 3 months ago, United States was criticizing India, not only criticizing India, to counter India's influence, they started saying that there is no democracy in India. It is an autocracy and India has to be saved from it. Then suddenly what happened? Today we have an agreement with the United States between the two countries. I think the beginning of a new world order. What should be the new world order is something which was confusing everybody. Who will take the lead? What will happen? And so what has happened most recently is that India and the United States showed the world an ideal relationship in spite of all the differences that we may have. If we are able to work together and bring in other democracies into a kind of a grouping or a kind of, not an alliance, but a grouping of democratic countries to confront the serious dangers of Chinese activities and also the threat that it holds out. So India and the United States have come to the conviction, despite all the differences that we still have. They still ask you questions as to what's happened to human rights in India. We still ask them how we said that the United States is not being so benevolent to the rest of the world. All these questions we ask each other. But we have been able to find a meeting point in the interest of the world. So I would consider what happened in Washington very recently is the first halting steps towards a new world order. And that, of course, had to be autocracies versus democracies. But there are so many players in the world. To bring them all to a kind of a new world order will probably take years. But the first move towards a new global order has been identified. I cannot say that it will succeed. Nuclear deal was supposed to be such a earth-shaking event, but nothing much came out of it. So it is quite possible that this earth-shaking event may also confront the confusion of the world, the other players in the world who would not want to accept this as a legitimate group. All this will happen. And in the negotiations for technology, I don't know what other things will come up, which will militate against a proper understanding of the situation and an understanding which would bring in other countries also into the fold. So this is a very, very quick assessment of what India has done. I mean, it will take years to formulate these things. But to put it very, very, very pithily, every crisis in the world, this is the point I'm trying to make, every crisis in the world in whatever situation we were, whether we were rich or poor or we had no resources, but India played a big role. And that is recognized also. It's not that it is not recognized. But that is why we are not just an emerging country or a country which is looking for leadership in the region, etc. If India is already economically also, we have the fifth largest economy in the world, and perhaps soon we will be the third largest economy in the world. So there also we have done well. So with this combination, we have a foreign policy which is now recognized all around the world. And where do you come in? The students come in. You need to understand the rhythm in India's foreign policy. And that you can see only if you learn history, learn politics, learn economics, but also understand the procedures, the processes with which India managed its 75 years. And this is exactly what I think our postgraduate students will get. They will get it from the professors, and they will also get from practicing diplomats who will be interacting. So that is real purpose. So those who join the international relations course will naturally look forward professional opportunities. What is it that you can get? Is it only a professorship, or are there other things that the international relations students can do? This has changed in the recent years. Now, international relations are not the monopoly of individuals or even countries. There are so many stakeholders in Indian foreign policy and in foreign policy as a whole. And they are all active in every country. In the United States, even more than anywhere else. Look at the number of NGOs, the number of newspapers, the number of think tanks. There are so many operating. And what you see in President Biden today is the overall impact of all these bodies. And there are thousands of people working on these policies, and it is not within the government alone. Of course, joining the foreign service will be an option for those who want to be practicing diplomats. But there are so many other agencies, voluntary agencies, and NGOs, all offering very great opportunities, apart from, of course, teaching, which is a dear profession for all of us. So the idea would be for us in Somaiya University is to shape a number of people who will be able to support and strengthen India's foreign policy and to make it continuously indispensable for the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. It was a very insightful information, and your observation of the India role, and especially in the current scenario. There are a few questions I have received. So the question one, which already you mentioned, but if you possible, you can give a little more light on that. What role would India play in the new emerging international order?
Well, that is the point I made, that we have made the first step, because it was very clear where India's fortunes will lie. There was no question about it. Particularly in the face of the Chinese expansionism and the Russian-Chinese collaboration. We had envisaged a different situation. We thought the Cold War would be between China and the United States, and we would be able to create other poles, in a multipolar world, maybe 6 poles, in which we will play a role as one of the poles. That was, and there we were thinking in terms of collaboration with Russia, collaboration with UK, collaboration with other countries who could be, in inverted commas, non-aligned in this process. But that has completely changed. China and Russia having got together, exchanging their promises to each other on Ukraine on the one side and Taiwan on the other, the world has completely changed. It is not possible for us to continue to deal with Russia with the same intensity as we used to do. Of course, we are still very closely related to Russia. But after this war has started, we must realize that the supplies from Russia to India, the vital supplies, have come down, because we still import oil, we import fertilizers. We are trying to help Russia to fight the sanctions because it is a matter of humanitarian consideration. So the new world order will definitely be led by the democratic countries of the world. and various developments will take place. There are so many countries in the actions. It's not that India and US can just decide on something and move on. But the beginning has been made. Now the other countries will have to take this into account, that this is a nucleus of a new world order which has arisen.
Yeah, thank you. Especially if you look, we look into in the last 2 decades, India has become like, the destination for foreign direct investment. Also, the the global marketplace, as well as the India playing role in geopolitical situation, like, playing significant role. So, as the China is the next neighbor and almost many front they are playing our equal role or maybe their different role. So do you think like India can be a next China, or you would like to rename name it something else?
I hope we won't be the next China. Naturally, we would have those attributes, I hope. But China has done well. But how has China done well? It has done by the support of the United States. If Kissinger had not gone to China, China would have been still a developing country and not the kind of power that it has become. So we should not forget that. So you cannot exclude a major power in your own development. Now maybe the United States is regretting it, but Kissinger recently claimed that I prevented a war with China. So that's what he claims. Maybe he did. But in the process, the price they paid was to create a monster. That's what they did. All their investment, all their technology was given to China, and now they have to deal with China on a different wicket. So, but we would definitely, now see, we said that we will not join any alliance. The United States was very keen that the Quad should become an alliance. And therefore we said, okay, if we don't become an alliance and if we don't get certain things, we will have to invent it. That's what we have done always. If a cryogenic engine was denied to you by the Russians, we would create it ourselves. So, and that would have been a longer process. But now the United States is saying, okay, you don't become an alliance. We'll still give you the technology for defense, which we give only to your allies. How did this change take place? Because they realized the indispensability of India in building a new world order. And that is why they have, it is not a generosity or it is humanitarian. It is not. We'll have to pay for all this that we are offering. But 3 months ago, we couldn't even think of ordering jet engines to be manufactured in India. We could not think of participating in a space program. We could not. So how many ideas? That list is endless. Because, of course, these are all to be worked out. But the opening that has been made for India to introduce into India defense technology at a time when our support from Russia is dwindling is very important for us. So we welcomed it. So when we welcome it, we do not mean that we will also adopt all the attributes of the United States in terms of their international vision. That's different. But it's important for us to have the technology and have the means to defend ourselves against whoever, and also develop our technologies ourselves. And that is this new beginning. And therefore, we will not become another China, but we are very far behind China. That also we should not forget. We are still dreaming of a 5 trillion economy when they have already 15 trillion. So you cannot really catch up with it in that sense. But we will be a benign rival to China. And also, if China misbehaves and engages in the kind of expansionism, we will have to have the courage as well as the means to meet that. And that is what we would expect to do in these circumstances.
Thank you. The one question also is very interesting, which is, you can say, the recent last few days. The India has coined the term, like Prime Minister, when you talk about the future is AI. And when you say AI is America and India, how do you see that in the coming decades?
That's a clever formulation that our Prime Minister is used to. He does create these these phrases, and everybody will say, oh, this is great. How didn't I think of it? All of us must have said when we saw AI being held up on a T-shirt. That is India. So he is great with it, or at least he has advisors who are able to create these ideas for him. So it's very catchy and it's important because AI is now considered a danger to the world. That's how it is emanating, as you may have noticed. But they are saying that artificial intelligence is probably more dangerous than nuclear technology. Why? Because humans are going to get inhuman capabilities or superhuman capabilities. And if these superhuman capabilities fall into the hands of Kim Jong-un or someone like that, then what happens? What he is terrorizing the world is nuclear weapons. Tomorrow, suppose he terrorizes you with artificial intelligence. Suppose they say that I'll turn all Indians into monkeys or something like that. Then what happened to the world? So it's a very dangerous knowledge or dangerous technology. So it has to be mastered now. And that is why he put it as America and India, because artificial intelligence is growing rapidly in China too. In fact, Kissinger said in his 100th birthday interview, he said we have only a small window of 10 years to resolve our problems in China. Because if China overtakes us in artificial intelligence, that will be the end of the world. So he said, I prevented a nuclear conflict. Now you prevent an AI conflict with China.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's the time will tell what is happening with the AI on the ground and on the reality. So another to connect the similar state visit of Prime Minister, I think all of us, we have seen one, the Wall Street Journal question when he said, like, the US State Department, however, criticizes India at some time in their relation with the human rights, press freedom, and such things. How do you view such as a criticism even after high in the partnership when you say like AI is happening?
No, before the Prime Minister's visit, this issue was settled in a sense. In the sense that the State Department said that India is a dynamic democracy. Okay, no criticism about minorities, anything like that. But just before that, they had produced a voluminous report giving, chapter and verse of human rights violations in India. And that was done because they have a constitutional liability to do that. State Department has been empowered by the US Congress to produce a report of this kind about every country in the world. As though they are the, emperors and they are going to determine who is not who's. But that has been happening for many years. You remember when Obama came here, we had all the fun and frolic. And the last meeting before he flew out, he said, I'm very concerned about, and Prime Minister was not even present there. He said, I'm very concerned about human rights. But that is his constitutional requirement. If he doesn't say that, he is not serving the purpose of the president as enacted by the US Congress. So our honesty is, according to them, is to look at these charges and give them explanations, which we have been doing for many, many years, because we all are signatories to many of these human rights conventions. And any violation anywhere noted is brought into the appropriate bodies, and we are hauled on the coals there. I have worked in the Human Rights Commission. It's not very easy to answer those questions. When they talk about a murder in Punjab, we'll take 2 months to locate which this murder was. How are we going to explain it to the Human Rights Commission? So, but this is a system which has evolved and we have to accept that. That will happen. But the moment we say that this is not a systematic and massive violation of human rights as it happened in South Africa, we do not have to worry, because we have to fight terrorism, we have to keep law and order intact in the country. There are certain responsibilities. So we cannot allow terrorists to have monopoly over actions. We need to counteract. And this has been recognized, I think, before the Prime Minister went to the United States. But they still suggested that the Prime Minister might answer 1 or 2 questions from the press about, and he did wonderfully well. So, and Barack Obama made the most unkindest cut of all by, giving a statement on that particular day, saying that I'm very concerned about India, and India, if it doesn't take care, it will fall apart. Imagine Barack Obama saying that. So these are kind of sensitivities that they have. But What we have to tell them is, please look at your own racial situation, your own human rights situation, which of course they don't even acknowledge it as a problem. So set aside this. We have set aside our position on Ukraine. Otherwise, we could not have, Prime Minister could not have even met President Biden. Set it aside. We set aside this for the interest of the world and for the interest of the two countries. And that's not a bad deal.
Thank you, sir. So I would request if any question from the audience would like to speak directly, so you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yeah, sir, just one small, observation, or what you call, I would like to, if I were to take these foreign policy, international relations, and their importance for the business and corporates, how do I link this? Like, we have seen a lot of foreign lobby, these in the meetings also, industrial law, people, CEOs were called, and these international relations means a lot for the business, right? Foreign policy and international relations. So how do we take this? Look, this is important for even management students to understand the geopolitical or these relationships.
Yes, this is why I keep telling all business schools that you must have a course in international relations. And I teach several business schools, very short semester on international relations.
I think, we should add into the MBA curriculum also. Now, having this a standalone program is okay, 2-year program we are doing. But in addition to that, to all, we have to sensitize all these things in the form of workshop or in the form of, talks, expert talks or something to the management students as well, I feel.
Yes, you must give them some credits for it. Because without understanding international relations, how can you do business? But here is a very good example. See, here in India-US relations, it is difficult to say whether it was political pressure or was it the economic pressure that led to this. As far as we are concerned, the technology pressure was very much there. If we had that time for 30 years, we need not have gone and bought these engines from the United States at very high cost and also political cost in a certain sense. But we don't have the time. So that has to be, so in international management and international economic relations, the political aspect has to be a major factor. And that is why your business students might also benefit from this new Department of International Relations will provide this kind of information. And here, technology has really led the recent developments.
Yes.
Not politics. We have not been talking about politics with them. We're talking with them the requirement of India, and they understood that. And they said, all right, even if you are not a military alliance, we need to strengthen you for other reasons, for the balance in international community, and that is being accepted. How it will work, etc., we have to still see.
Thank you, sir. And just one more small thing about India-China trade and this imports sort of a thing. So, in spite of having all these issues with China, why are we not able to little reduce the dependence on Chinese imports?
Yes, we have tried. You remember when in 2020, one of the things we did was not only negotiations, but also buying S-400 and becoming good friends with the US, all these did. And the fourth thing that we did was some kind of economic decoupling. That is a policy. And we tried. But people of India cannot live without TikTok. What can you do? So it came back.
That is in actual, if I look at the data, sir, it is not showing. That is what is my concern.
Yeah, it's not showing, and they are making as much money in India on TikTok as they did before 2020, even today. So that is because no, there was this famous man in Ladakh who wanted complete boycott of China. He campaigned for it very, very effectively. But he himself came back and said, sorry, I cannot do this with India because they lower to pharmaceuticals. We say we are the dispensary of the world, but 70% of our components come from China. So what do? So we cannot, as Blinken said in China, we cannot decouple China, but we can de-risk it. I think it's a very wonderful word. We have to deal with China.
Yeah.
But we should make sure that it is without risk to ourselves. And I think that's a policy we should also follow in case of China.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question from the participants? Please unmute yourself. Feel free to ask the question. Any participant?
But all the questions before they ask them.
Yeah. So I have one more question from the student perspective. Like one question what Professor Asha has asked, I think it has responded, you have responded to that, like the scope of international relation for the student is concerned. So connecting to the same question, another question is like, what sort of the challenges and obstacle would an international relation student face if he intend to remain in such line of the work? What I'm saying, like, how it will take to the from career perspective, what are the challenges would be there on the way?
Well, study, like Lenin said. What else can you do? A student can only study and give valuable advice to the government. So there is no such challenge which arises out of knowledge. Only knowledge only will meet these challenges. So the purpose of any education, in any subject or any department, is basically to secure the strength for the students to understand issues instantly because of their background and able to advise people like us who do not know the theories to deal with the situation. So it's a mutually comprehensible situation which will evolve. So there is no specific challenge as such in studying international relations because there is enough material. Now with the internet, there's nothing that you cannot master or understand. And so I don't think there will be any particular challenge. But the idea is how to generate a good, innovative idea out of your learning. That is the challenge. Because these days it is not a matter of knowledge alone. It's a matter of inventing knowledge. Our PhD students must particularly do that. In the old days, you could get a PhD by collecting information. But now you cannot do that anymore. You have to come up with things which are innovative and practical. And that is a challenge. But there again, what is the answer? Question, thinking, brainstorming. Those are the things that they can do.
One more question which I'm observing. Like, if you look into the number of the foreign missions, it's like the embassies or maybe foreign missions abroad, India is one of the top 12 countries. Almost around 180 plus missions are there outside. And the Prime Minister also announced the new consulate in the California and the US in Bangalore and Ahmedabad. So how do you see like India, the foreign relations is going to play a bigger role, and connecting to your topic where you mentioned about Indispensable India, how this is going to link and contribute to the bigger picture?
No, India's diplomatic contacts around the world is quite wide, considering our economic capacity, because these embassies cost money. Putting a man in Washington for 3 years, it's a huge amount of money that is to be spent. So despite that, we have been able to put up missions, not only in developed countries where we can get things, but also in developing countries, we only have to contribute. African countries and others. The very fact that India is there gives them the confidence that, there is a country which is not a major power, but at the same time, at their disposal. And that is why we have opened these missions. Many of these missions may not have enough work to fill a 24-hour day, perhaps. But that is not the issue. The issue is that you are able to represent India there, and that shows your concern for that country. And that immediately creates, so when some missions are opened in India by Latin American countries, etc., if we don't respond, it creates a problem. So we now have expanded. In fact, since Prime Minister Modi has come to power, there have been several missions, almost 50 missions have been established around the world because of the demand. And that is a part of our projection. And that we are doing well. And the people-to-people contact can only be done with the embassies. Distant lands, how else do they know? People who goes to Mozambique unless there is some kind of a mission there. It's impossible for us to have the people-to-people contact. So, but the new consulates by the United States in India is a major step, because today there are so many problems for Indians to get American visas. You all must have experienced it. And one of the things that has not been publicized in this understanding is on H1 visa. H1 visa, people had to go out of the country to renew it. That's been changed. Now they're saying that you can do it in the country itself. So the US administration is very liberal about visa and immigration, because that is a sensitive subject for their own people. So they say, why is that foreigners are all coming and taking away our jobs? That kind of position in India is available. But the leadership has to see that there is a balance between availability of foreign technologists and their own jobs. And so they realize that India's personnel are important. And that is why, together with this technology, they have also liberalized the visa regime. And that they're opening an office in Bangalore and Hyderabad will greatly help. And our having a consulate in Seattle is extremely important. Now, name the biggest businesses in the world, it's all in Seattle. So how can you operate it from San Francisco? It's a huge country. So this is a welcome.
Yeah, and probably that's why the Amazon announced $12 billion as an investment. Very
it is worthwhile. Yes.
Yes. And just to connect to this, because looking into the from student perspective, as there is a way to enter in the foreign services is one, civil services. Another, it has been in the talk, other than the civil services, what are the way how the student can get the career opportunity in terms of this foreign missions or maybe other activities, how the student can look into as a career perspective?
Well, ideally, entering the foreign service is the answer for those who have studied, and it's an optional subject in the civil service examination. But it is not necessary that you should do that in order to join the foreign service, because the foreign service competition is not restricted to one subject or the other. You have to be a full personality, so you have to learn a lot more than international relations. So the presumption is that once you join the service, you are the right material, you will be able to perform the functions required of you. That is the logic of the civil service as a whole. We don't enter the foreign service knowing everything about diplomacy. No, it is learned on the ground. So similarly, international relations, if you study, it will be helpful for you in the foreign service when you join, but it is not so necessary, because you will be taught as soon as you enter, then you will have the experience. So that is the best career probably an international relations educated young man can aspire to. But then it has other aspects. But that's why I mentioned UN is a little bit closed for us, because we have too many Indians in the UN. The national quotas are always overfilled. So an Indian can get into the UN only in exceptional circumstances, that you have to be the only man in the world with that qualification that they require. But still Indians are getting in. So there are Indians like that. But it is restricted. Unlike other countries, you can take an examination like the civil service and join the international civil service. That option we do not have. But still, it's open for people to apply for specific jobs. And if you are qualified, just because you are Indian, you will not be denied. So that is it. But more than that is all these NGOs all around the world. There are so many, not only humanitarian, but also human rights. There are so many of them. And environment. Now, environment is a very good field for international relations. If you know all about climate change and all that, you can get any number of jobs anywhere in the world. It is growing very fast. And then technology, artificial intelligence, all these will be very important for diplomacy. And so all this would help you to get a job that you would like to do.
Yeah, also the new institution coming up, which is taking good shape, like BRICS or maybe SCO or any other such institution, probably a student can also look into as a consultant. Like MEA, I think also they started taking the few consultant based on the particular geography and the country. So probably that could be also another area where they can look into as an alternative career.
These are days of consultancies, because the paid officers don't do any work. Everything is done by consultants. So that is the fashion these days. And there seems to be enough money for that. So consultancy opportunities are very much there for IR scholars.
Yeah. So thank you very much for responding to those questions. Any other question would like to from our faculty side?
One last, it's not a question, it's a query. I'm Professor Shivakumar. Sir, what is your view on what you had mentioned in one of your books authored by you recently, More Diplomacy, Viewing Through the Shakespearean Prism? You mentioned about a neighbors first policy. Probably it's an appropriate time that it's about 9-10 years now. Going for elections around this time, a decade back, the present political party for 2 consecutive terms. Are we still a force to reckon with in our neighbors? I mean, let's not compare India with China for that, but either in the East Asian region, Middle East, South Asia, how are we as a country, compared to some 10 years before?
Well, if you look at our immediate neighbors, situation is worse. But if you look at the distant neighbors, much better. And this Chanakya had said long ago, he said, don't expect friendship with your neighbors because they are there to exploit you. Okay. But you go for one further. So don't go to Pakistan, but look beyond Pakistan.
Correct.
But look, go to Indonesia, go to Malaysia. So this is an
Singapore, for example. Singapore. Yeah.
The far neighborhood will be much more friendly. If that is the rule of law in the world, then we are doing very well. Our relationship with the distant neighbors is much better than here, because here the neighbors, we are the biggest country here and we have the richest country here. Therefore, they look at us simply from a point of view of getting, so India has a responsibility to take care of them. But they don't see it as a support or cooperation. Gujarats have tried the Gujarat doctrine, saying that don't demand anything from us, give them unconditionally. It was a failure because then they started for asking more and they thought they had no responsibility to respond. So non-reciprocal diplomacy will not work. And Gujarat Sahib himself realized it. So we need to have a balanced kind of relationship. And Mr. Modi started with neighbors first. He tried everything possible. But even his dearest country, which should have been Nepal, even they are not able to work out an arrangement with India. Because these are all principles inherent in the situation. And look at the United States and their relationship with Latin American countries. It's very simple. None of them has any respect or concern for the United States. So this is something that we have to deal with. So I must say, with the SAARC being in trouble like that, we have actually gone back on our neighborhood policy. But certainly our policy remains the same. If only Pakistan were to abandon their terrorist activities, SAARC will immediately come back to life.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Assuming if there is no questions, then we'll proceed to the end of the session. Just last round, if any question is there, we'll be happy to pick up. Okay, then as the time is also reaching out, and I would request our colleague, Dr. Dinoz Upadhyay, and to give the vote of thanks on behalf of the Department of International Studies.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. We had a very insightful discussion today, and
can take that opportunity to give vote of thanks. So, on behalf of Department of International Studies, SK Somaiya College, Somaiya Vidyavihar University. So, would like to Ambassador to thank you so much for giving very insightful session and answering all those questions, which is very relevant in the current scenario and also in the future context. So thank you, Professor Shivakumar sir, for giving your opening remarks. And also would like to thank our Vice Chancellor, Professor V.R. Rajasekharan Pillai, for his guidance and his mentoring for setting up this international studies program. And our Chancellor has been throughout supporting to incubate new ideas and use programs. So thank you. Thanks to the top management for all support. And also would like to thanks Professor Monica Lodha, Director of SKSC Somaiya College, and giving full support for taking this kind of initiative. And also Dr. Asha ma'am, thank you for participating and asking the question. And thank you, my other colleague joining and the students. Thank you so much. So we look forward for the few more sessions in the coming times. We will let you know, we will update you. Thank you, all the best, and good evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.